Hello and welcome to Chapter 6, Reading and Writing about Different Kinds of Text. So this week we are going to be looking at some ways to analyze and go through different works. They don't necessarily need to be essays. Pretty much anything with words involved in them. You're going to look at strategies for reading anything visual in any sort of way that has text associated with it. There's going to be an emphasis in author's purpose this week. That's going to be really what we want to focus on as we go through these active reading strategies. So instead of focusing on one singular concept, we're going to be going from type to type to type to type to type. We're going to be looking at textbooks, news articles, business documents, web pages, blogs, cartoons, all sorts of different things with the goal of, if you have to analyze them, what's the best way of doing so. And remember, before you start for any of these, you are defining your own purpose of why you're having to read them. So are you reading them to learn the information? Are you reading them because you're contrasting them with something else? Are you analyzing them to see whether they should be trusted? What is it about the text that is going to be important for you? And the first thing to do before you start analyzing for yourself is to look at how it's organized. So, for example, if we're looking at a textbook, you're going to be looking for a table of contents. If we're looking at maybe comics or something like that, and it's a series of them, how are those organized? If it is a research article, how is that organized? And that will tell you a lot about what the author values and what they want you to get from it. As we talk about strategies for each of these particular things that you're going to be analyzing, we're going to be doing so through checklists. So what can you look for to help you? And remember, you're not starting by reading the entire thing straight through. You're skimming first and you're looking for things like titles, section headers. Are there words that are bolded and italicized? And what do those seem to be? Is it just important words? Like if we're talking about a textbook, they're probably vocabulary. Are there checklists or summaries at the end of the chapters? Sometimes they'll be at the beginning, but a lot of times they're at the end and they re-go over the key points. So these two things right here are going to come up kind of the same. Are there charts? Are there graphs? Are there diagrams? A lot of times the graph will be a summation of the most important information, in the sense that whatever it is they're trying to prove in that chapter or teach you in that chapter is going to be based off of the data. And so just seeing the data can really, really tell you a lot of information. If there's additional information that the chapter points to, like quotations, maybe there's an excerpt from another work, maybe there are links to a web page, whatever it may be, you look for those first. So this week there's also going to be a lot of supplemental practice offered. And on page 167 in the textbook, you're going to use the checklist that we just went over as a guide, and you're going to annotate for those things and then make an outline of that. Now, once again, this is just practice. What we're going to be going through today, just practice. But going through this process will really help you see the advantage for this. you'll end up being able to keep and maintain all of those thoughts in your brain much more easily. Okay, so we're going from textbooks now to news articles, and you'll see that a lot of the things that you're skimming for are going to be similar. So, like, instead of a title, we have a headline. They still use boldface sometimes. You need to see whether there's charts and graphs. But there are some differences. A textbook's purpose, if I ask you, well, what's the author's purpose for a textbook? You're going to tell me, oh, it's there to inform the readers. It's there to teach us something. A newspaper or a news article is not always there for that reason. It can be. A lot of the articles are going to be, but not always. So if you see something like an editorial or opinion piece or commentary, the author's purpose is no longer just to inform, but it's to persuade. It's, hey, I think this based on the news story or the information. It's very, very important to be able to tell the difference between a straight up news story and someone's opinion. If we're looking at someone's opinion, a lot of times they will give us a couple of sentences about the author. Why do you think that's important? Well, it will show us or give us a preview of some biases that they may have. So, for example, since we are hot and heavy with politics right now, for example, if we have an article talking about, let's just say, Donald Trump, and the biographical information at the end of that opinion piece states the political party of the writer, we may take the article way differently if we know that a Republican wrote the article versus a Democrat writing the article. That's good information to hold. Or as another example, maybe there is an article about veganism and it hits very differently coming from maybe someone who is a rancher and raises cattle versus an activist whose entire life revolves around trying to convince people not to eat meat. Very, very different takeaways from that, even if the information in the actual article is the same. You need to also be thinking about the 5 W's: who, what, when, where, why, and then how. They answer a lot. Things like when, very, very important, right? The dates, sometimes the place. They can change things a lot as well. We know that different cultures hold different values and opinions on different issues. If we are looking at a website, there may be related articles linked. Those can give us some clues, maybe to the publication slant. So some newspapers are going to be more on one side of some political issues than another. All of those things are important. This too has a practice where you find a news article on page 169. Is where it has like the checklist for you, and you're going to find a news article somewhere on the web. You don't necessarily have to print it out, but you make annotations for it, and then you draw some conclusions about it. You know, like, why did the author use those particular things? Can you trust it? Should you trust it? And, you know, if everyone kind of went through this thought process as they were reading articles, the world might be a little bit of a better place because we would have some skepticism, some healthy doubt when trying to weigh whether we should listen to someone's opinions or not. All right, so we went through textbook and then we went through newspaper, which is kind of like the more opinionated, maybe having some biases or slant. Now we're going back the other way where we're talking about business documents. So we're talking about emails, we're talking about reports, we're talking about contracts, anything like that. Though a lot of the stuff that we're going to be talking about are simply like emails, memos. And in this case, we're less concerned about whether the person is believable, though that can come up. We're more concerned about the who, what, when, where, why, and how of it, where something valued in business, or we're going back to the purpose, right? To inform, entertain, persuade, whatever. Business memos are not going to be for entertainment. They're going to be to inform or to persuade. And within that, brevity or shortness is very, very important. They need to be to the point and not waste time. So there tends to be a regular flow of how these things go, right? Like in an email or a memo, they're going to say who it's addressed to right off the top. There's going to be some sort of subject line that should summarize whatever it is. If it's a report, then the heading should summarize that information or have some sort of section that's literally for that. And there may be a call to action, like here are our action steps, here's what we should do next, here is the next thing. You're not going to have a lot of extra fluff in there. But it is important to be able to pull out, is this just information that we're supposed to take into account? Or is this someone's opinion and they're giving us what they think the right next step is? You're still going to see the bold, italicized, and underlined text for emphasis. There's not... business documents are kind of an interesting thing because there's not like a singular format for these, and yet they share more characteristics for organization because they tend to be much more brief and to the point than some of the other stuff that we've looked at so far. So there's a practice for this one too. And if you are working or have a job, you can go through this, but you can also just Google like examples of business memos or documents and go through it. Anyone who's worked in an office for a while knows that you get a lot of emails, and some people are much better at writing emails than others, effective emails. And they come to how well those employees are able to go through the kind of checklist that we just went through and leverage each of those things. Like if you use bold, that can be very effective to emphasize certain words. But if you overuse bold, then it becomes meaningless. So there's always a balance to those things. And many times where people are not explicitly taught these skills, they're kind of things that you pick up over time, and some people are just kind of better at it than others. Okay, now we have web pages. And the thing about web pages is we have to go back to author's purpose again, because there are all sorts of different web pages that exist. They can be for information. They can be for entertainment. They can be for persuasion. How the website displays its information is very important. Do they use color? Are there frames on the side? Are there supporting images? Do ads make it like unbearable to be able to read? What do they link you to? Is there a search box? The thing with web pages is that there's no real limit because they don't have to be printed, and they're not as high stakes as like a business report. So sometimes you get articles that are less controlled, or they just keep going and going and going, and they can be a little bit harder to pin down than the other ones that we've talked about. You really have to go in kind of knowing, oh, well, based on the other things on this website, what is the purpose here? Once again, we have a practice. You're going to get or go to a web page, and you're going to mark it up in the same way and evaluate. What you'll probably find for this one is that whoever designed the web page could really tighten it up in certain ways. So especially since you've come from a business side of things and the textbook side of things, you'll see that there's a lot of waste in the websites. It's kind of like if you've ever looked for a recipe before online, and there's like someone's life story before you ever get the recipe. Web pages are helped by having a lot of words on the page because search engines can more likely to populate based on keywords. So if you have more words, there's more keywords in there. And thus you get a lot of gratuitousness. You get a lot of extra. Okay, blogs are part of those web pages, but specifically they're people just talking about things. They're kind of like editorials in that they're someone's personal beliefs or experiences. It's just that they're not filtered by a newspaper editor saying, hey, I approve of this, you can publish it. This is just someone deciding on their own to do so. Blogs, in the name of being a quote blog, are kind of going away. But blogs, in the case of just someone posting an article that they've written, maybe on their feed or some sort of tweet longer or something like that, those are more common than ever. It's just they may not be labeled as a blog anymore. So you're going to find one, and you're going to go through the same thing, and you're going to really try to compare it to the editorial in compare and contrast. And you'll see that there are a lot of similarities, but maybe they lack the tightness or professionalism, just in the same way that a textbook versus a web page. There's sort of a looseness to the web versions of those. The former things that we just talked about all were heavily text-based. And now we're going to talk about visual texts instead. So what does that mean? What does visual text mean? Visual texts are more concerned with the picture involved than the words on them. Now, they still will have words, but it's arranged more about the visual. And we're still concerned with the author's purpose. We're still concerned with how it is that they're going about conveying the information, but they're using a different medium. So remember, it's all about the main idea, and we're always looking at the author's purpose and what it's wanting to do and who it's for, the audience. So if we have questions that kind of go with what we were just talking about, we would say something like, okay, who's the audience? What are the actual individual pieces of whatever the visual is? And if there are multiple, Are some more important than others, and how do you know? Is there some sort of background that combines them together? How is empty space used? So is there a bunch of white space? Is there shading? Anything like that? Are there things that are repeated? Do they have any sort of special effects? Or is this just like a photograph or some sort of graph that's very, very dry? Uh, does the visual include people? If so, what kind of people are displayed? Remember, if we go back to the audience, if there's some sort of visual that's supposed to appeal to a certain group, then the people in that image should appeal to the target audience in some way. Is there any written text? If so, what's it there for? And then, are any two images juxtaposed to suggest a relationship between them? And juxtaposed means like contrast. Think of almost like parallel and perpendicular lines, where parallel are doing the same thing, and then perpendicular are kind of like one's going one way and the other's going that way, and they cross over each other. Juxtaposed is about showing the relationship. Are they there to emphasize each other doing the same thing? Or are they there to show just how different each are? On page 180, there's 3 visuals there. And if you go through all of the questions, you should conclude that there's a specific purpose and intended message there. So go ahead and try that out. If you are struggling with this, if you don't kind of naturally come to it, I think the great place to start with this sort of thing is watch or look at magazine advertisements and start picking them apart. It's a really, really good way to up your analysis skills game, because you're going in already kind of knowing the purpose, right? They're trying to sell you something or sell someone something. It may not be you. You may not be the intended audience. And then you start asking yourself, well, okay, what are all the pieces that's supposed to appeal to that particular audience? And it may surprise you just how many little details exist for each. So you can take one of those. Remember, we just we're talking about like magazine articles or the examples in the books, and you can mark them up. So you can start circling, underlining, star box, circle, show connections between things, and then afterwards write something down to really explain how it's doing its job. There is an example here for you. So this is from page 182. And they have an example annotation in the textbook of all the stuff. So this is a great example of the juxtaposition, right? You have the juxtaposition of someone, a child, sitting inside watching a TV versus them being outside. If you notice, his expression goes from kind of just being neutral or slightly unhappy maybe looking, and he looks happy now. What is this wanting you to do? Oh, it's wanting you to go outside, right? Who is the audience for this? The audience for this ad is not the child. And that's an important aspect to be able to nail down. Well, how do I know it's not for the child? I mean, there's a child there. Well, how old is that child? Maybe like 6 or 7 years old, maybe 8 years old, somewhere in there. Is a child going to be deciding whether they're predominantly spending time inside or outside? Probably not. They're going to listen to their parents or what their parents allows them to do. Also, where was this ad from? This looks like a magazine article. Is a 7 or 8 year old reading that magazine? Well, probably not. I mean, if this was in something like a highlights for kids, then yes, I would agree with you. But if this was in something like a National Geographic, probably not, because the people who buy that tend to be older than a 7 or 8 year old. Okay, here's another great example. So we have this photo here, and you're going to annotate it. And this is a case where we don't have any text. Okay, but we're able to draw out a lot of conclusions that someone shared this picture with us for a specific reason. We can determine some surrounding, like where it came from. Maybe this was paired with a news article. But what's the most important part? Well, obviously this car right here is supposed to give us some information, right? That's our focal point. And we see a lot of trash around it. It's inside of a tree. We see what looks like the remnants of corrugated metal roof, like a tin roof or something there. The car looks like it's in fairly good condition, so this was not just like a junk pile. The trees in the background kind of look messed up as well. We can guess that there's some sort of natural disaster that has happened here. The people in the background don't necessarily look dirt poor, right? And so in certain areas, maybe you see this amount of trash and everything in just very, very, very poor areas, but that's not the case here. And so that tells us that maybe there's a tornado or a hurricane or something like that. Okay, so we've been talking about visuals, and I mentioned a couple of these before, but here's a more comprehensive list of the types of visuals that you may see. You might see maps and diagrams. You might see photographs like we just saw. Editorial cartoons. So it's an opinion. It's a cartoon with an opinion, and we'll look at that in a little bit. Advertisements we've been talking about. Charts, tables, and graphs. Things that you, and infographics, you will see in like reports and that sort of stuff. They all kind of have the same checklist. You're going to be looking for any sort of title or caption, and you're going to be thinking about how color is used, what you think the purpose of it is, and where they're getting their information from. Especially for charts, graphs, and tables, where are they getting their information from? Is this like an FBI statistics? Is this a scientific study? Where are they getting all that data from? And so we have a practice here as well, where you're going to find one in your textbook and you're going to annotate it and then be able to summarize it and reflect on how it helped you understand the overall data. A map as well. Think about different maps that you've seen in your lifetime. A lot of history textbooks will have old maps in them. What is there and what is not is very important. What kind of shading or color is there? Maps do a great job of labeling things because they have a legend there that will tell you like, oh, there's this solid line versus a dotted line versus like a star. All sorts of stuff, and they're labeled nice for you. You can practice this one by looking up a map and annotating it. Okay, diagrams. They're going to be very, very similar to the last two. They're almost like a combination of the last two that we looked at. A science textbook, for example, is going to have quite a few diagrams in it. And you're going to look through and find a diagram and do the same thing. I'm going to kind of go through quickly on these because they're so similar. Photographs. We already talked about this photograph a little bit. And one of the things that we focused on was, oh, this car is really supposed to be the focal point. Even if it may not be centered, it's the largest thing. It's more towards you. Is red. It stands out from all the surrounding brown and gray. Very, very important for the like framing of it. So all of those aspects are part of the composition and important for the author trying to emphasize or the photographer trying to emphasize specific things about that picture. Okay, so you can preview that one and you can write your response over that, or you can find another one. There are a few publications out there. I think CNN has one where they go over like the most impactful pictures in the last year, and they may even talk about what makes them so powerful. We have editorial cartoons. This is a kind of older, now older because he's not even running for president anymore, editorial cartoon where it's very clear if you read it that the author has a specific point of view. So in this case, this person was not pro Joe Biden. We can see that from them. They're making a statement about Joe Biden. They're essentially saying that he's corrupt and doesn't really care about the country very much. And we get that based on the exaggerated nature of all of this. So they take on something controversial. They're there to persuade you and make you think about things, but they are only giving you one side of things. And they really, really make it over the top and silly to prove their point. I tend to think of these as for people who already have a thought about something, or maybe you're slightly leaning one way and it strengthens that belief. If you had someone who really, really liked Joe Biden and they saw this, they would probably just get annoyed more than convinced by something like that. And that's okay. Sometimes that can be what they're going for as well. Because at the very least, maybe if it gets you angry, you start talking about the issue. They do tend to have text, but not always. A lot of times they will label the specific things and what they're supposed to represent. Look at the facial expressions. Look at the what's exaggerated. Look at what's supposed to be a symbol. See, he has his hand on the Bible. He's supposed to be telling the truth. So you see the seal of the President of the United States, how his smile and everything going through there. Advertisements we've already talked about a little bit. Remember that they're supposed to be persuasive for sure because they want you to buy something or vote for someone or do something. But they're going to have some information on there, right? If they're trying to sell you, I don't know, M&Ms, they're going to tell you at least what the M&M is partially made of, whether it's peanuts or chocolate or whatever. But ultimately, they're going to be persuasive. Okay, so when you are looking at advertisements, think about, is there a slogan involved with it? Think about the intended audience and purpose. Usually there's going to be some sort of message involved as well, though not always, but usually there is. How do those things work together? I'm sorry, not image, text. There's not always going to be text involved. There's always going to be image involved in an advertisement. So how do those things work together? In a perfect world, we would always have logic with our purchasing decisions. But if you look at advertisements, it's very clear that it's not really supposed to appeal to your sense of logic most of the time. They may have a little bit of that in there, but most of the time it's going to appeal to your emotion in some way. They're going to show happy people. Oh, don't you want to be happy too? Buy our laundry detergent. And it's very easy to spot once you have it in your brain of, oh, how are they trying to manipulate me to buy something? And you'll start seeing all the little things. So I want you to find an advertisement in some way and then go over its key features, mark it up, annotate it, and then write a little bit of analysis for it. All of these have similarities to them. It's really about figuring out the who, what, when, where, why, the author's purpose, and then are there additional visual elements to help lead you to whatever it is. Remember that for most of these, space is a premium, and they're fighting against our attention span. And so they are going to tend to summarize their information as much as they can. And that is pretty much it for this chapter. So we went through a lot of different things, but the core idea or principle is pretty much the same. In the near future, we are going to be going over different types of texts instead of things like news articles, business documents, web pages, blogs, charts, graphs. Instead of that way of doing it, think of it like almost different kinds of essays where, like you guys are writing a narrative essay. Well, what are the pieces of a persuasive essay and all of that, okay? So keep up the hard work. I'm going to be providing as much feedback for you as possible with everything, but just hang in there. We're about halfway through the semester now. Just keep it up and keep doing a good job. Thank you.